This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Welcome to the Heroic Voice. I'm here with Bill Morrison, a former editor of Mad Magazine, a comic book pro supreme. It's good to see you, Bill. It's been a while. Since
Too,
you don't live in
Dennis.
the area anymore, it's hard to get together with you.
Yeah, I'm across the country now, so I do get to LA occasionally, usually once a year or so, but it's usually not when there's an event, like a cartoonist event going on, unfortunately.
Yeah. So we were talking very briefly. Let's talk a little bit about Mad, because I remember you took it over, you revamped it, you went back to the original logo. It felt like you were trying to get a feel for what Mad used to be.
Yeah.
But then they decided to go in a different direction, or
Well, DC in general, and for people that don't know, DC, uh, Warner Brothers owns Mad. And when Bill Gaines died in the early 90s, Warner Brothers didn't really know what to do with Matt, um, and they thought, well, we have a comic book company, we have DC Comics, let's fold it into that. So DC, pretty much owns Mad, and DC got a new president. Uh, Sometime after there was the merger with AT&T, which is around the time I came in as the editor in chief. And then we got a new president. Diane Nelson stepped down, and priorities changed. So
hmm.
Mad's still going. It was mostly reprints, and now every issue they're getting more and more original material, which is great. I talked to Sergio Aragonis the other day, and he's doing regular work for Mad again.
That's great.
So
Yeah,
that's great. Susie Hutchinson is the art director that I hired when I came on board, and Susie is still running the magazine. She's doing a great job. But basically, when I was brought on board, I was sort of given a very difficult task, which was they wanted to attract um, more of everyone. The demographic of Mad at the time was basically 11 to 14-year-old white males and 45 to 60-year-old white males. and and so there was this, big hammock age-wise, but also in terms of different ethnic groups, different sexes. So they wanted to attract more of the people that were not reading Mad. But at the same time, Mad had a huge subscriber base. That's where most of the sales are for Mad. And these are people who've had subscriptions since they were kids,
yeah. I
years
had
and
one
years
when
and
I was
years.
a kid. I mean,
Yeah,
I know how that
and
works.
some and there were a lot of subscribers who started subscribing when they were kids and then just never gave up their subscriptions into adulthood, and they didn't want to lose those people. So they told us, we want you to reimagine Mad and kind of reboot it and make it attractive to all these other groups, but don't alienate the people who are already buying it. We don't want to lose subscribers.
You sounds like you were given two different opposite directives there.
Yeah. I always say it was like they handed me a Fabergé egg that was full of silly putty. And they said, we want you to get the silly putty out of this very fragile egg, but don't break it in doing so. You got to find a way to get it out of there without breaking it. And so, I hired a good staff and, we put our heads together and we started thinking, we really love a lot of the stuff that we grew up with in Mad that fell by the wayside for one reason or another. Like, for example, the lighter side, when Dave Berg died,
Hmm.
that got retired. But we thought, well, what if we just brought that back with a different artist and different writer? And so it's going to be relevant to a modern audience and an audience that's made up of women and different, ethnicities, non-white people, basically. But it's also going to be familiar to the people who grew up with man. So we did little things like that, where there was kind of like comfort food for the mad fanatics, but it wasn't so outrageously different that this new audience we were trying to attract wouldn't be attracted to it.
Did you ever get any numbers on that?
Yeah, we actually we were doing really well. Our subscription numbers went up. Newsstand didn't really go up, but magazines in general,
Yeah.
newsstand sales have been declining, so that was a tough one to fight. But the subscriptions were up. We offered a subscription incentive, which was a little Alfred mini tiki mug, and everyone wanted one of those. It was like one of those. They used to have back in the early days. They had incentives like the straight jacket
Yeah.
that you could get if you subscribed, and they had the little Alfred statue, the little bust, and things like that. And I thought, let's give subscribers something that they're really gonna go crazy over and that they can't get anywhere else. Um, and so we did that, and subscriptions went up, and we were doing pretty good.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry because I did like what you were doing with it, even
Thank
though I
you.
didn't like the fact that there was advertising in the book, but that's been true for a long time.
Yeah, we didn't bring that in,
Yeah.
and by the time I took over, that was a institution. We were stuck with that.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Color interiors, that was different.
Yeah,
But it did, while you were doing it, it did feel like Mad Magazine. So I give you
thank you.
great kudos for that. All right, let's talk about the same thing that I ask everybody else. How did you get into the comic book business? Uh,
Well, I was a big comic book fan as a kid, and once I realized I could draw, I started thinking in that direction, like, maybe someday I can be a comic book artist. And as I got older, that became really my goal. Um, but weirdly enough, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan.
that's not so weird.
Well, that part's not weird, but the weird part is I was terrified of New York. So I grew up in Detroit back when it was called the murder capital of the world.
Hmm.
But New York terrified me. I think because I grew up in the era of gritty cop shows um, that took place in New York and Martin Scorsese movies. And all you ever heard was crime, crime, crime. Like New York is a terrible place to live. And so I kind of resisted that. And I was still gonna go to New York, but I was dreading it when I was in art school. And I got about 2 years in, and I had an instructor for an airbrush class. So I was taking illustration, and he got me kind of turned on to the California airbrush look. Um, you
Which
know,
is what
well,
exactly?
it was a style back in the 70s and early 80s that you could see on record album covers and movie posters, greeting cards. It was like a real kind of glamorized, stylized view of everything, whether it was cars or pinup girls or buildings. It was just like very slick, glossy, shiny kind of a look. And I got really into it, and I thought, I enjoy doing this. I do it pretty well. Maybe I'll go out to California instead and just pursue a career as an illustrator. So that's how I got out to California. I started doing movie poster work. Um, at that first job, I met an art director who was friends with Matt Groening. And this was before The Simpsons came along, before he dreamed up The Simpsons. So he was just a struggling cartoonist. And he used to write copy for the movie posters. We would do, ad campaigns for movies, and they would bring Matt in to write the taglines.
Hmm.
And so I got to kind of know him a little bit that way. But this art director was key. She was a friend of Matt's. And after I had left this job and I was working in Glendale for David Willardson, and I was doing a lot of Disney movie posters, I got a call from her one day. I hadn't spoken to her in a couple of years, and it was just after The Simpsons began as a primetime half-hour show. So I had watched it on the Tracy Ullman show, and I watched the Christmas special in '89. So this was like early 1990, and the series had only been on as a primetime show for about 3 weeks. And so I got this call, and she said, Matt Groening has put me in charge of all the merchandise for The Simpsons. So I have to recruit artists to do artwork for all this tons and tons of merchandise that's about to be coming out. And she asked if I could do freelance and if I was, interested at all in doing that. And I said, yeah, if it's slow here, I can work on other things. So for about 6 months, I did freelance for The Simpsons, just packaging art. I did some advertising. I did TV guide ads, magazine covers, things like that. And then after about a year, so it was 1991, um, this magazine started coming out called Simpsons Illustrated. And I worked on the first issue. I did like some spot art. And that magazine had a comic section.
Hmm.
And at the time, working on the magazine, I had no idea it was going to have comics in it. But one day, while we're working on that first issue, Steve Vance, who was the editor, called me up and he said, "Hey, I've got a script for a comic strip for the first issue. Do you want to draw it?" And I don't know if Steve knew that that was my childhood dream to be, to draw comics or not. I don't remember if we'd ever talked about it, but I just obviously I jumped at it. I was like,
Oh
yes,
yeah.
absolutely, I want to do that. So it was like about it was kind of like a Sunday strip. It took up half a page in the magazine, and it was a Krusty the Clown strip. And I had the best time. I had so much fun drawing that. And I called Steve after it was done, and I said, "Hey, if there's going to be comics in every issue, I'd love to, work on one for the second issue. If you've got a script I could work from." And he said, "Well, actually, we're, Matt really wants to have a big comic section, big comic presence in every issue, but everybody's really under the gun to try to get the second issue done, and nobody's had time to write anything. So if you want to write something, then you can also draw it."
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds fine." Now, I had never written anything in my life. I'd never even thought about being a writer of comics. I just always assumed I would, get scripts that were written by somebody else and I would draw them. I never thought beyond that. So suddenly I've agreed to write a comic strip. And this time it's going to be a full page. So, 1 page story. And I was just like, man, what do I, it'd be too embarrassing to call him back and say, I can't do this, so I better figure this out. And I started thinking about when I was a kid and just funny things that happened to me when I was Bart's age. And I came up with a memory of something, and I thought, yeah, that'd work. I could just turn me into Bart.
Hmm.
I could turn this adult from my story into Homer, and and it went on like that. Actually, it was Apu. So it was the first one that I wrote was Bart and Apu, and so I turned it in and kind of crossed my fingers. Got a call back from Steve, and he said he thought it was fine, and Matt had read it, and Matt thought it was great, and he rewrote the punchline. He just said I thought the punchline could be a little funnier, so he came up with a really good last line. And but that was it. That was, there were no changes other than that. And Steve said, so if you want to write one for number three, then go ahead, and then you can draw that one as well. And then from there it
Snowballed.
just kept going.
Yeah.
So for
Bongo
two
comics.
years,
Yeah.
yeah, for 2 years I wrote comics for the magazine, and at the end of the second year we did an annual, which was we actually made it a comic book,
I
and that
remember
was
that. I
Simpsons
remember.
Comics and
Yeah.
Stories.
Uh-huh.
And that was what gave Matt Groening the confidence to start Bongo, because that book had sold so well. Um, he got Steve and Cindy Vance and me together, and he said, "I'm thinking about starting a comic book company. Do you guys want to join in?" And that was like I don't want to say it was a dream come true, because I never dreamed that could happen. It wasn't like, I mean, whoever gets the chance to start a comic book company from the ground up with a property like The Simpsons.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. A lot of people do, and uh, and it's some are really successful and some aren't. Yours has been very successful.
And to
Um,
a certain extent, yeah, but we've never
yeah.
really cracked through. I mean, we kind of been in a holding pattern with a loyal base of fans
Hmm.
that it's hard to crack through the Marvel and DC stranglehold. You know.
It is, and that's why I say to be given that opportunity with something that's already a phenomenon. And it's Matt Groening owned the publishing rights to The
Yeah.
Simpsons. He didn't own it in terms of the animation that's owned by Fox and now Disney, but he retained all the publishing rights, so he had the right to do whatever he wanted with those characters, and they were already world famous. So um,
Matt
that
was a
that,
Matt was
that
a
was
good is
amazing.
a good businessman,
Yeah.
with everything else.
Hmm.
So, all right. So Bongo Comics, went several years with that.
Hmm.
Um, and helped keep it going for quite a long time. Is Bongo still operating? I honestly don't
No,
remember. I didn't think so.
Bongo stopped publishing in 2018. And there is still a small group of people who repackage material for uh, publishers like Abrams and
Hmm.
HarperCollins. So they, like you may have seen those Treehouse of Horror omnibus books.
No, I haven't, but
Okay, they're on like the third one now, and they're
I'm sure
big,
we can
thick
find a visual for them.
hardcovers. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, so there's people who are doing new art for those, for the covers and end papers, etc. Um, and then just doing the production work to put those together.
Okay, so let's talk about what you're doing now. After Mad switched directions, you left. You left LA. You abandoned us. What are you
Yeah.
up to these days?
Well, I worked for about 6 months on an animated series, and then that job ended. It was just a contract job. And I had sent a text message to my sister who lives in Michigan still. And I just said, just want to let you know my job's ended and I'm looking for something else. It's keeping her up to date. And she texted me back a little while later and she said, I went on Zillow and I looked up your house in California. And she said, for what your house is worth, you could buy two houses in Detroit and still have money left over for a vacation home. And I thought that was funny because my wife has never, she's an actress and she's always said, I never want to go back to Detroit. I love my family and love, people back there, but she just never expressed any desire. But I showed her the text, because I thought it was mildly amusing. And I said, "Oh, look what Alice, my sister Alice, said about buying a house in Detroit." And her response was, "Hmm." And I said, "What do you mean, hmm? What does that mean?" And she said, "I don't know." She said, I've been thinking, my mom's in her 80s and she's doing so great, but if that changes, I'd kind of like to be there." And she said, "You're in a position now where you can kind of work anywhere. And you've always talked about going freelance and not being tied down to a company." And I said, "Yeah, that's true. But, are you sure you want to do this?" And she says, "Well, I don't know. I'm thinking about it." So she had injured her foot and had to keep it elevated at the time. So she was spending like all day on the computer. And she just went down this rabbit hole of looking at houses in Detroit on Zillow and those other real estate sites. And like every 10 minutes, she would call me from, I'd be in some other part of the house and she'd say, "Bill, come here." And I would go, "What? What's going on?" She'd go, "Look at this house." And okay, well, where's that? "Well, it's in this really cool area of Detroit. And, look at the price and look at, we always wanted an old house. So we were primarily looking at like old classic looking houses. And we ended up finding this one that was on Lake St. Clair, outside of Detroit, but not by, um, not too far. And it's about 115 years old and beautiful four square house, but it needs some love. So we've just been, actually, I should say, she's been fixing it up. I've been trying to earn the money to fund all the various projects that she has at the house.
So, what are you working on right now?
Today, I just finished of kind of a fantasy cover. I have a column on a website called 13th Dimension, which is a comics oriented website. And
Can you give us the URL for that? Is it numbers or is it spelled out?
it's just, oh, it's numbers. So it's 13thdimension.com.
Okay.
And so I have a column every Monday. It's called Morrison Mondays. And sometimes I write about, different topics. I tell stories. Sometimes I just show art. It kind of started because I've done a lot of parody covers, especially with The Simpsons. It started with me just showing some of my parodies of famous mainstream, mostly superhero comics. Um, but that can only go on for so long. I did a lot of them, but not, it's not an infinite amount. So now I've started just, it's kind of a very eclectic mix. And every month we get from the editor, Dan Greenfield, we get a list of things to celebrate, anniversaries in comics, birthdays, etc. So today, as we're recording this, it's Jerry Lewis's birthday.
Ah,
And I'm a big Jerry Lewis fan and love the Adventures of Jerry Lewis comic book that DC put out for so many years.
with Bob Oxner.
Bob Oxner and Owen Fitzgerald before
Mhm.
him, and Neil Adams did a few.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and anyway, there were four covers or four books that they did in the series, sort of towards the end, where Jerry met some of the famous DC superheroes.
Oh,
And it started with a Batman issue at the height of Batmania. So in 1966, they did a crossover between Batman and Robin and Jerry Lewis. And so a year or so later, they did a Superman one, and then they did the Flash, and then they did Wonder Woman. And the I think the Wonder Woman issue was a few issues before the series ended. So the piece that I just finished today is what if the Adventures of Jerry Lewis continued beyond issue 124 where it ended, and he continued to meet DC superheroes.
Hmm.
So I did a fantasy cover of Jerry meeting Green Lantern, and it's kind of drawn in the Bob Oxner style, as as close as I could get to it. Um, but anyway, that's it's just kind of a a thing I do for fun, and it's kind of self promotion. But um, other than that, I'm still doing Simpsons work. Um, there's a company called Jack's Pacific, which is out there in Los Angeles, and they've got the Simpsons toy license now. And they produced a 18-inch King Homer from the Treehouse of Horror episode that portrays Homer as King Kong. And they did it all in black and white, just gray tones. And it's part plush, part plastic, like the face and the hands, I think, are all plastic. And I did all the box art. And so I've been doing that lately, just packaging art for toys,
That's
mostly
cool.
Simpson stuff.
Do you
Yeah.
have any like things that you really like to do that yet you have not done yet? You dream projects?
Like on the bucket list,
Yeah.
I'm a huge Batman fan, and I've always wanted to do a Batman story, even a cover. And I actually did get to do a retailer variant. They reprinted Batman 251, which is the Neil Adams Joker cover that's got Batman strapped to a playing card. The Joker's giant and he's kind of standing over Gotham City and he's holding
Oh,
out this
yes. Yeah, the
card and
classic
Batman
one.
strapped
Yeah.
to it. Um, so this retailer uh, who I know wanted to reprint that cover with a variant cover, but in place of the Joker, he wanted the wrestler Danhausen. And
Okay.
Danhausen is this famous wrestler who has face paint. He kind of looks like he could be a member of Kiss. He's
Hmm.
got this kind of scary, face makeup and eye paint, and um, and he kind of looks like the Joker. He's very thin. He's got a big grin, and so he talked to Danhausen, and he said, "Would you like to be on a Batman cover?" He took that idea. Danhausen said yes. Took that idea to DC and said, "I want to do a variant cover. I want to have Bill Morrison draw it, and it's going to be Batman 251, but with Danhausen in place of the Joker." I would have thought that would be a no, like a hard no, because it's like messing with a classic. It's putting in this wrestler who people may or may not know. If you're not into wrestling, you might not know who he is. Um, but they said yes, and so I
Sure.
got the green light to do it. So I did get to do my first Batman cover. It's not one of the mainstream, widely distributed, so it's just a retailer variant. But still, it's like it's official, so I can check that off my bucket list.
All right.
I still would love to do a story though. That would be amazing. I think if I got to do a Batman story, I would probably do it more in the animated style,
Hmm.
because that's just kind of more in my wheelhouse. But years ago, Paul Dini and I pitched a Batman story to DC, and it was set in the early '60s. It was going to be drawn in that Dick Sprang, Shelley Moldoff style.
Uh-huh.
I did a pitch piece for it. It took place in Las Vegas, and it had the big giant props that Batman comics were famous for back
In the
then.
50s and 60s, it was
Yeah,
giantism was all over the place.
right. And it got turned down because they said we're not really doing retro Batman stories right now.
Hmm.
So maybe sometime in the future, but
Could
they
revisit
turned it
that.
down.
Maybe one of the editors at DC will see this interview.
Maybe
Yeah,
that
we'll
would
see
be
if we can
nice.
work that out. Because I'd love to get you your chance to do a Batman story. That would be
Oh,
cool.
that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. All righty. Before we wrap this up, um, I thought you mentioned before we went on the air that there was something else that you were in fact working on right now, but maybe I misheard.
Oh, Roswell.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yes, I did a crowdfunding campaign with Zoop, and we're doing a book that collects all the existing Roswell material. So it's all the Bongo issues. It's a couple of indie stories that I did that were in black and white, and they're now colored. It's pinups. So it's everything that exists to date. And
So it's basically a Roswell archive.
yes, and I was kind of basing the success of the campaign, or I was basing the idea of relaunching Roswell with new stories. I was basing that on the success of the campaign, and the campaign was very successful.
Good.
So once this book is out, I will be either crowdfunding new Roswell books or possibly looking for a publisher.
Crowdfunding, I think, is the way to go. Because that way people can pay you directly
Yeah,
and get the book. So I would recommend that. That's the way
yeah,
we do things now. We do crowdfunding.
yeah.
So,
And this
alrighty.
was my first crowdfunding project, and it was a great experience. So I wouldn't mind doing it again.
Is there social media? You have a presence there. People can follow what you're up to.
Yes, I'm on Facebook. It's Bill Morrison Atomic Battery Studios. That's my professional Facebook page, and then my Instagram is at Atomic Battery.
All right. I would encourage everybody to go there and see what Bill is up to. Keep an eye on the Roswell project. Also, um, 13thdimension.com. Go there.
Right?
And also go to Heroic Publishing, at heroicmultiverse.com. I would also encourage people, which I forget to do too often, to like this if you like it. Subscribe to the Heroic Voice, the YouTube channel, share it, right? And send out the links to people, please, because that's the only way we can grow this channel. Bill, it's a pleasure to see you. I miss our monthly, chats that we used to have.
I do
Uh,
too.
Okay. And I hope that once you get the new Roswell project going again, the new material, get in touch with me. We'll do this again. We'll tell
Okay.
people what it's up to. All righty. Have a good weekend. And
Thank you. Great
again,
talking to you,
thank you.
Dennis.
Thank you for being here.